Refined question list for pedagogical bridging. Conceptual clarity questions. On why both systems matter. They're not redundant. Someone might ask, if OPS is more precise and rigorous than Jung, why not just use OPS? Your answer to this reveals a lot about your pedagogical vision. What does Jung's framework offer that OPS shouldn't replace? And conversely, what does OPS add that Jung didn't systematize? Make the case that practitioners need both systems for complete understanding. I would say that they need the Jungian foundation in order to understand OPS. But I do think that OPS is actually a newly instantiated, I think it supersedes the previous system. I think that both systems matter because it matters to have a foundation in orthodox Jungian functions and psychological types in terms of the principal and auxiliary function, in terms of Jung's collected works, in terms of what makes up a psychological type in terms of its psychological functions. I think all of that matters in a highly concretized way in order to understand the splitter's frame of reference when we're talking about objective personality instantiating 16 psychological functions as opposed to the orthodox 8 psychological functions. But when it comes to the advancements that objective personality has made throughout the years, I think indeed they're bringing something new, and that something new supersedes the old characteristics of what we've been using beforehand. So do I think both matter? I think they matter in the context of how classical mechanics relates to quantum mechanics. I think that Jungian types and Jungian functions are a classical system that is the foundation layer for the theory that is to describe a function substrate that is super layered on top of the existing theory, meaning at this point of resolution, we don't have the data necessary to theoretically instantiate psychological functions from the perspective of, well, what are... Jung wrote out a whole treatise on the general descriptions of the types to be able to describe, okay, so what are the similarities and the differences between these functions, and how do they relate to the bundles of functions? Jung even wrote out for Jung even wrote out for extroverted deciders the extroverted rational types, summary of the extroverted rational types. And then he even wrote out summary of the extroverted perception types, extroverted observers. And then he proceeded to write out a summary of the introverted rational types, the introverted deciders. And then he wrote out the introverted perception types, the introverted observers, and he wrote out summaries for each of these. So he laid the foundation for what OPS describes as the human needs, OI, DI, DE, and OE, in no particular order. So someone might ask, if OPS is more precise and rigorous than classical Jungian theory, why not just use OPS? Your answer to this reveals a lot about your pedagogical vision. What does Jung's framework offer that OPS shouldn't replace? What Jung's framework offers is an energic point of view, a final cause perspective in the orientation of the psyche. And that's a crucial theoretical distinction that Jung makes, or that Jung introduces on psychic energy. And this is carried forth in terms of how he thinks of libido and how libido relates to the attitude orientation. And that's a core theoretical distinction that we need to bring forward in terms of making sense of how this splitter conceptualization makes sense from a philosophy of science perspective in terms of lumpers versus splitters, to actually instead, it's not, I mean, it could be, you could just say, hey, they're taking a splitters perspective, that's all that needs to be done, and that would probably be okay. But because the lumpers versus splitters dichotomy is a reflection of psychological types themselves, it means that we have to do due diligence to the theoretical notion that psychological functions are actually instantiations of a split modality characteristic after the attitude orientation has differentiated a function versus before an attitude orientation has differentiated a function. That ontological difference creates a different characterization, and we can only bridge that what that would mean based on a classical understanding of Jungian psychological functions and psychological types. What does Jung's framework offer that OPS shouldn't replace? And conversely, what does OPS add that Jung didn't systematize? OPS adds ontologically distinct functions because of the modality instigation. OPS adds a higher order combinatoric that links functions together energically. OPS adds a newest layer in terms of social types as another higher order combinatoric. This time we don't know if it's anchored to the psychological functions or whether it's free floating as a social abstraction. So that is what Jung's framework offers that OPS shouldn't replace. That's what Jung's framework offers that that OPS shouldn't replace. The theoretical instantiation. OPS mainly focuses on applications / practice. So it's really about drilling down on the typing layer and getting typing situated so that we can backwards rationalize theory at a later date. They're focusing mainly on, can we type people, and then using that from a self-help perspective to say, hey, how do you move through life? And by what measure can you become a better person? By recognizing where you just leave things off because you don't know, you don't have an orientating mechanism to be able to say, hey, I thought that this was a void. I didn't realize this was a void I was leaving in my life because I thought somebody else would handle that, because I thought it would be taken care of by someone else, because I thought, as opposed to because now I have a way to actually itemize the functions of my psyche and the energetic movement, the energic movement of psychological functions in terms of how their energetic orientation moves throughout a psyche. So that's what Jung's framework offers to OPS that it shouldn't replace, the theory layer. And conversely, what OPS adds that Jung didn't systematize is they added first intellectual property achievement was the 8 going from 8 psychological functions to 16 psychological functions, which means that there are now 64 grant function stacks instead of 16. So we have 16 times 4 equals 64 grant function stack permutations. This has been associated with the Klein 4 group. And then OPS adds a higher order combinatoric that links functions together using my term ordonance in order to reflect a structuring of the psyche based on the grant function stack and labeling the grant function stack 1 to 4 in order to be able to determine the directionality of a function touch orientation in relation to an animal function activation. but we are still in between knowing that it's animal function activation versus it's just ordonance. I think it's just ordonance, but there might be a way to include the animal function, or it might be synonymous, but I don't know if it's synonymous necessarily, because the way they do activations, it doesn't necessarily originate from the differentiation of the function. It may loop down in terms of the actual orientation of the energic flow. So make the case that practitioners need both systems for complete understanding. Practitioners need to have the foundation. OPS is like a 400 level class, if I'm frank. Maybe 300 if I'm able to distill it down. But objective personality, the system itself, the framework, the foundation as it's instantiated, the theory itself is about a 400 level class, right? Original Jung is like a 200 level class anyway. And so to bridge that gap, you have to understand, you have to go through the master's in order to get the PhD. You have to go through the bachelor's of science or the bachelor of philosophy in order to get the master's. And objective personality is probably like PhD level as opposed to master's level. So it just shows you the distinction of what it takes to build a proper foundation. Now, do you need to know orthodox Jungian psychological functions to be able to type people? No. That's the power of objective personality technique. They offer a system where you can type people incredibly efficiently by understanding their linguistic attributions for the coins that are added up in order to be able to determine formal notation. This is important, and this is crucial for determining a psychological type in a system, but it's excluding the theory layer, and you might exclude the structure layer in terms of understanding, well, how do I actually write out, or how do I actually describe a psychological function in terms of a psychological type? Am I just talking about an animal function? Oh yeah, they're using blast. Or can I go a couple layers deeper to talk about the directionality, to talk about the ordonance, to talk about the temperament, the animal function temperament, to talk about the animal function itself? Those are 4 different characteristics: directionality, ordonance. Directionality, ordonance, animal function temperament, and the animal function itself. That gives you the function, the directionality in terms of the function energic principle of which function is being activated in what context in relation to ordonance. Is it 1 to 2? Is it 2 to 4? Is it 3 to 4? Is it 1 to 3? And it going over that as a reflection of, okay, so if it's 1 to 2, we're talking about the first function leading in that as the directionality, and then carrying that forward in terms of what modality the function has, and then adding that to the next function and its modality to give an instantiation of, okay, well, this is what it means when you were talking about a specific directionality, a specific ordonance, a temperament modality, and a temperament animal function modality, or an animal function, let me rephrase that. Directionality first, modality second, and then animal function temperament, and then animal function proper. And then that gives you the modality, that gives you the function plus the modality plus the function. On why both. So make the case that practitioners need both systems for complete understanding. This is my case for why both systems, why practitioners need both for complete understanding. If you want to contribute to objective personality theory, then you have to understand the theory that built the foundation for objective personality, because objective personality is building on the foundation that Jungian practitioners have built as a result of the function substrate, the attitude orientations, the grant function stack, and a few other principles. So this is why both systems matter. They're not redundant. Someone might ask, if OPS is more precise and rigorous than Jung, why not just use OPS? Your answer to this reveals a lot about your pedagogical vision. What does Jung's framework offer that OPS shouldn't replace? And conversely, what does OPS add that Jung didn't systematize? Make the case that practitioners need both systems for complete understanding.